The Foundling, Part 3, by Polite Badger. Hine awoke early the next morning, to a slight chill, a pink and turquoise sunrise, and a truly revolting smell. She closed her delicate nostrils and tried very hard not to gag. Of course, it was coming from that thing Maverick had found the previous day. Gods, it was like death. Maverick was lying sprawled across the bushels of tubers at the back of the wagon. Tale, as Maverick called it, was laying atop her husband's stomach. Both were still fast asleep. Like father, like son, the thought came, unbidden, to her mind. She frowned. Hine prodded Maverick awake crossly, opting to let him deal with whatever this was. Maverick awoke slowly. As always, he rubbed his eye blearily. As he sat up, Tali stirred and opened its mouth. Hine was briefly afraid it would begin wailing again. To her relief, the creature closed its mouth without a sound. It balled both hands and rubbed its eyes as if copying Maverick. Then it began screeching. "What the devil is that smell?" mumbled Maverick. Hine only snorted in reply, and gave a pointed look at the thing on his lap. Maverick picked the creature up cautiously by its armpits. As the shawl fell away, the exact source of the smell was discovered. Hine reached over, extracting the now soiled piece of cloth, pinching one corner between her fingers and thumb. The little monster had defecated on itself. Maverick had told her yesterday that he thought Tale was sentient, so he named it. Hine hadn't been convinced. Now her suspicions were confirmed. Clearly, no sentient being would ever do something so disgusting. Maverick glanced over at Hine. "Guess we'll have to train him out of that," he said. Maverick seemed to still be in good humor, despite the situation. Exasperated, Hine exclaimed, "Train him? No. We'll be turning him over to the city authorities, remember?" Honestly, it was as if Maverick had left what little sense he had at home. Maverick didn't answer. He turned his attention back to Tale. "Now let's get you all cleaned up," he said cheerfully, as if Tale had only gotten a bit of mud splashed on his clothes after playing in the garden. Still, it was hard for Hine to argue with him. They'd seen a well in the yard of one of the old abandoned farmhouses a couple kilometers back along the side road. Hine left Maverick sitting atop the wagon box to untether the galpany from where they'd left it grazing the night before. She glanced over her shoulder and almost laughed. Maverick was still holding the creature at arm's length. It was obvious the smell had bothered him as well. He was just pretending otherwise. Hine took a couple deep breaths. Now that she no longer smelt it, things didn't seem half as bad. Hine was the one driving now. She wanted to touch Stinky Tale even less than when it had smelled all right the night before. Maverick thankfully had not objected and even gotten it to quiet down a bit, apparently by talking to it. After a short time, they had reached their destination. The water in the well was cold and fresh, and Maverick had Tale cleaned up in no time. They hung the shawl and Tale's clothing, both damp but no longer stinky, along the wagon's axle. The morning sun would dry them both in no time. Tale seemed perfectly happy crawling around on the yellow grass. Hine watched him while peeling a handful of tubers. Maverick was a few meters off, grooming the galpany. Him? She was almost as bad as Maverick. Oh well. Tale pulled himself up, balancing against the bucket, standing on two shaky legs. He splashed at the water with one of his strange small hands and made a noise that might have been a giggle. After a few seconds, he fell. Hine hoped the little imp had not hurt himself. She needn't have worried. Tale was back on all fours in no time. He crawled towards her, and Hine, startled and inhaled sharply. A full-grown adult could probably have outrun it with relative ease, but it unnerved her nonetheless. And those eyes. What sort of creature was it? Tale was grasping the edge of her outer robe, pulling himself up. Hine came back to her senses. Even standing, Tale barely even came up halfway to her knees. He giggled. Apagadagabaga. Tali seemed to be trying to communicate, but so far as Hine was concerned, it was nonsense. Gada, Tali insisted, still staring up at her. Hine was at a loss. Fortunately, Maverick came to her rescue. He scooped Tali up in one smooth motion and deposited the creature on his lap. Tali drank an alarming amount of the honey-colored tea. He still refused to eat any of the tubers, much to Hine's chagrin. Hine was done trying to convince him, but Maverick hadn't given up yet. He was sitting in the grass, with the creature in his lap, and small bits of the purple vegetable in one hand. Hine almost snorted. He was trying to reason with the little beast. "Come on, Tata," he said in a sing-song voice, usually reserved for the Galpenny. "They're yummy and good for you, too. See?" he asked, popping one in his mouth. Tata, as Maverick now nicknamed him, babbled something unintelligible in response. Maverick patiently explained again, and Tali stuck the next piece in his mouth. A second later, it was spat back up, covered in saliva, onto Maverick's robes. Hine wondered how long this exercise would continue. "Aha!" exclaimed Maverick, startling both of them. Tali twisted his head up and looked at Maverick reproachfully. "He doesn't have any teeth! No wonder he can't eat them." Hine resisted a strong urge to sigh. It was now mid-morning, and they were scarcely closer to Ma'ani City than the night before. Hine had a sneaking suspicion that Maverick was stalling them on purpose. She suspected he was hoping that she'd warm up to the little monster and agree to keep it. It wouldn't work. Tali ought to be returned to his own people, and the authorities would be the only ones able to find them, whoever they were. Everything would be as the gods willed them. The Foundling,